Hi, I'm Katrina Santan, and I identify as Asian American.
My name is Meredith Clark, and I'm a Chinese American adoptee.
My name is Elisa Wong, and I identify as Chinese American.
My name is Fang, and I identify as Sino-Vietnamese, which means I am culturally Chinese, but I grew up in Vietnam.
My name is May, and I also identify as Sino-Vietnamese.
Hi, my name is Judy, and I identify as Chinese American.
Hi, my name is Cordelia, and I would consider myself to be a second-generation Chinese American.
Do you want to do that hair flip again?
Do it.
Ready, go.
Oh my god! Was it majestic?
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. So my parents were both born in China, in Hebei Province, which is where Beijing is. So both of them grew up in rural China, born in the late 1950s, so at that time it was pretty hard for them. I don't know a lot about my dad's childhood because he doesn't really talk about it much, but I know my mom grew up in a town, I think now it's called Suzhou. So she grew up with 5 sisters and 2 brothers. So it was a pretty big family, and they all worked in the fields at that time when she was a kid. And I remember she told me that when she was really young, like a toddler, there was some sort of food shortage or like a famine. So she told me that she almost died, which was pretty intense. My mom was able to go to school while she was growing up. She went all the way through high school, and at that time it wasn't necessarily like normal for daughters to finish high school education, but my mom was able to because my grandpa was really supportive of her education. But at the time, the Cultural Revolution, because of the Cultural Revolution, all the universities and colleges were closed at the time. So after she graduated high school, she couldn't really keep going. And for a couple of years, she kept on working in the fields. And she told me that the way it worked in the fields, they would wake up at sunrise, go out to the fields and work for a couple of hours. And then around lunchtime, they would go back, eat lunch, and have some time to take a nap, an hour or two. And so while everyone else would take their nap, she would review her physics textbooks and her school textbooks, because she would feel so sad if all the stuff that she learned in high school was just lost from working for so long. And then in the late 70s, China reopened higher education, and they opened up the college exams to everyone. So my mom was both my parents actually took part in that first round of examinations, and apparently everyone in China pretty much tried to do that as well. My mom took that exam next to her own high school teachers, which is pretty cool to me. When my mom was taking the college examinations, the examinations are several days long. So she told me a story where one day when she was coming back from her first day of exams, she slipped walking back home and twisted her ankle pretty badly as she slid down a hill. And that night, it swelled up really big and it hurt a lot. But she knew that if she didn't show up for the next day, she would have no chance of getting in. So my aunts actually helped her. So the next day, they all put her on they put her on a bicycle and wheeled her to her testing place so she could take her exam. And my mom had no idea that she would get in. She told me that lots of the times she was so unsure of her answers. When the results came back, my grandfather was working in the fields, and a high school teacher got the letter that she had gotten into med school, and that teacher went to my grandfather first and told him. In my mom's town, only my mom and actually my aunt, my dai, the two of them were the only 2 people in the entire town to get into higher education. So my mom went to med school and my aunt went to grad school, and I think my grandpa was really proud because it was his 2 daughters that made it in. My grandfather is no longer with us. He died of a stroke when I was a kid. I didn't really know him very well because I was pretty young when he died, and also when I was a kid, like my grasp of Chinese was also pretty bad as well. So I didn't really talk to him like before he was no longer able to speak because of his stroke. And I actually never really, I didn't know the story about my mom and my grandfather until after he died. So. I'm not sure where else to go next for this. At med school, my mom met my dad, and they got married pretty soon after they both graduated, and they actually had my brother. So my brother's 10 years older than me, and he was born in Chengde. And my parents both worked as doctors for a while. My parents didn't get to the US very easily. It started out with a lot of visas, work visas. A lot of times they were separated, my dad would be alone in the US, or my mom would be alone in the US, and the other one would be with my brother in China. My dad's side of the family, after he left to go to med school, they stayed in the countryside for a long time. I remember when I was around 8, I visited that side of the family, and they were still living in the countryside. No internal plumbing, no indoor plumbing, very rudimentary power. I remember I really hated being there because the toilet was the hole in the ground in the yard. I just really hated that. But a couple years ago, they all moved to the closest city, which was Weichang. And on my dad's side of the family, a lot of them became teachers or doctors as well. So I think they're doing pretty well. But where my dad used to live in the countryside, I don't think there's really any people left there. They pretty much all moved to the city. When we moved to the US, my dad started preparing to get his medical license back because they both came from China. As doctors, the license from China doesn't hold over in the US or Canada. So my mom didn't have the time to do that because she was taking care of me. But my dad studied for quite a while. My mom never got her medical license back, which is something that I feel is pretty common for a lot of women who come from China as doctors. I know that when they were in America for a while, they lived in Texas, and at that time, Texas didn't really have much of a Chinese, population at all. So, they were pretty isolated. They had to drive pretty far to even find a small Chinese market. Lots of the vegetables they were used to eating weren't available. If they wanted to watch the New Year's Eve show in China, 春节晚会, they couldn't. Nowadays, if you want to watch Chinese TV, you it's pretty easy. You get a CCTV box or KTV box, and satellite TV just comes. But they would have to go to this small store in Brooklyn, Chinatown, and buy DVDs or rent DVDs and return them to get any sort of Chinese content. So I know, especially for my mom, that was really hard. My mom definitely told me these stories for several years, just at home. I like to help her cook dinner a lot. So usually with just the two of us, she would tell me those kind of stories. It's only kind of recently that I started really remembering them or understanding them, because my mom can speak English. She's lived in the US for several decades now, but her grasp of the language still isn't quite comfortable yet. So she still likes to tell stories about herself and her childhood in Chinese. And when I was younger, I just really, a lot of times I didn't understand just words she used, maybe they weren't common usage, and a lot of the details just kind of slipped by. And then at Wellesley, I decided to start taking Chinese classes, and that really helped a lot. So when my mom tells me stories, I can kind of have a better grasp of vocabulary or grammar, and I feel it's really helped us become closer. A major reason why that I wanted to take Chinese at Wellesley wasn't just to better understand my parents, but also to be closer to my relatives in China. So a lot of the times when my grandmother would call, I wouldn't really be able to talk to my grandma because, she would just like, I would pick up the phone and be like, like, la la, ni hao, and then not really know what else to say after that. So, like I think after my first semester of taking Chinese, I was able to it wasn't a great conversation, but I was able to say like, at school, like I learned, I started learning Chinese, and like having it was a short conversation, but it was like, I think my first conversation with my grandmother. And like my Lala was like the last grandparent I have right now.
We don't like to be thought of as a package,
We're not a
but
package,
it sort of
yeah.
happens all the time.
And we somehow ended up coming to the same college, and we're also roommates.
That's fine.
Yeah.
My mom was born to a farming family, so my grandpa owned a farm, and that actually was a very big farm. We had like durians and like different kinds of fruits, right? And I loved going to the farm when I was little. And my mom actually, we lived a little bit farther from our farm, so like she uses the fruits to like sell, right? So we would make like business deals with people. And my mom grew up, she only went to second grade, so she had to drop out of school to like earn money to support her siblings. Because my grandma adopted a daughter. She has two daughters from birth, but then adopted another one just because she found her somewhere. I'm not totally sure about that. But my mom dropped out of school to help the family out, and she makes bun bao, which is like basically buns. Yeah, she still makes them for our buns. And my grandpa from my dad's side was a military personnel. Like he was a parachuter in the war and like eventually died in the war. And much of their childhood was really centered around the war. And I think my parents aren't very open about talking to me about memories that are sad. But they do tell me that, my parents met just because my dad was sort of like a player. She said he went after her. And then my mom just sort of my dad's family was quite wealthy, to be honest. But my mom's family, they were farmers, very humble, sort of a way of life. So my dad pursued her, and they got married eventually.
My grandparents from my mom's side both came from Guangdong, China, and from my dad's side, his father came from Fujian, China, and his mom was actually born in Vietnam, but her parents came from Guangdong, China also. Both my parents were born in Saigon, Vietnam, which is a relatively big city in Vietnam, in southern Vietnam. And growing up, my mom had a nickname because her mother owned a little supermarket in her neighborhood, so she was known as the veggie girl because she sold vegetables at the front of the house. And my mom never had formal schooling, so what she did when she was I think around 7 or 8, she would sneak into the local church for informal lessons. And then at home, my grandmother would try to teach her Chinese through old Buddhist books, actually, not actual books. And my dad, he went to Chinese school. He never went to Vietnamese school, so he never had a formal Vietnamese education, but he had a Chinese education up until he was 8 years old. And then he had to drop out to help my 2 uncles to raise his 5 little sisters. It was at a friend's wedding when my dad saw my mom, and he was like, wow, who's that pretty girl? And then my uncle was like, that's my little sister you're hitting on. And he disapproved of my dad for a long time. He was like, no, that's my little sister. She's also the youngest, so he was very protective of her until my dad was very persistent. Kept coming over, and eventually my uncle was like, all right, fine, one date with her.
Well, my dad grew up in a family that was quite large. He has 5 siblings, And he was the oldest, so he remembers the most about my grandpa who died in the war, and I think that affected him a lot, and has led him to do things that aren't necessarily good for him. Like he was addicted to alcohol for a really long time, and I think that's like one of the ways in which the war has affected him. And for my mom's side, she has just become very quiet about the war, but she does tell me about like happy memories from like the war, like in Vietnam. Like for Tet, which is like the Lunar New Year in Vietnam, my mom would like chase the tanks with the American soldiers, and they would like pass out candy, right? And all you had to say was like one, like give me one, like, and then like they would like throw them candy, and my mom's like, that's like one of their happier memories, which is like, I'm glad that she speaks about it and still be happy about it. You know what I mean? My mom, I think that gives me the impression that she's like a very strong woman.
Like she only emphasized like happy things about the war, and even when she tells me like really sad things, like for example, she remembers seeing like piling, like the soldiers would pile dead bodies up to like burn. So like they would, and my mom would see them like hosing the bodies down, but she would tell me in a way that like, oh, like I was very sad for them, so I went to pray for them. My mom became very religious and very, like she's very attached to Buddhism, and she would be like, oh, I would pray for them. And my mom, because I think of the atrocities of the war, like she doesn't see people as inherently bad. I think she raised me to think that people are good, and like people do things because of circumstances, right? Like because like during the Vietnam War, people had to turn bad to be able to like ensure their survival, and they would like tell on each other. But my mom was like, like people aren't inherently bad. They are, like raised in like really bad environments, or like external factors would like force them to act a certain way.
My mom has never talked to me about the war, but my dad has. So when he was around maybe early 20s, he and his younger brother had to like go out into the more rural areas. During the war, the city was like deprived of business, so he had to go out of the city very often, almost every single day, to look for a business. So he would often like pass by abandoned houses and like battle scenes pretty much, and it was pretty like scary, like yeah. So but he would never tell his father when he returned, so he and his brother like had a deal of like, okay, we're gonna keep doing this because we have to raise the family, but we're gonna keep this from our parents because they would never let us go out. The train was like occupied by soldiers like very often, so sometimes the soldiers would like try to harass pedestrians or just people, civilians, and like the way out of it is basically bribery, so like you gotta bribe your way out of things. So my dad always had like a pocket full of cash in case anything happens.
My dad, he always reminds me how like he wants to visit Vietnam before like he's too old to. So when I started college, he like often reminded me like, oh, you have to work hard, so you don't have to live like mommy.
So the paperwork to come to the United States started in 1998 when I was born, right? So one of the reasons why my parents wanted to move over here was because, like we had families over here. Like most of my dad's family were already in the United States for about 30 years. My grandma has been sending, like money over to support my family during the entirety of our lives. So we know that it's like, we know that we have connections over there. Even growing up, I knew that my grandma was in the United States. And during, the time that we were, doing the paperwork and a lot of different things that like held us back from coming over here, it took us like maybe 8 years, and it didn't have to take that long. And my mom actually got arrested in Vietnam for, publishing Buddhist beliefs or like things that went against the government. So that was like one of the main reasons we had to come over here to avoid jail time for her. And one of the reasons why she got released when she got arrested was because my little sister was just born. And that really pushed the paperwork to go through, and that's why we came over here like very suddenly. And I had to like, basically like drop out of school to make sure that we would be able to like seamlessly just move over to the US.
So we came here because my uncle was here. So he was a refugee during the war, and he was the first to make it in our family to come here. So after a few years of like establishing his life here, he was able to get my grandparents and my dad's 5 little sisters, which are like my aunts and stuff, to come here. And then the paperwork started with us in '89, and then came in 2004. So during the process of the paperwork and coming here, it took quite a bit of time. So I remember my mom used to take me to like this guy who was like the translator, and we had to like, we were in this like really dark, sketchy room all the time, like doing paperwork and like filling out forms. And then I remember like at the end of the session, my mom would always hand the man like a stack of cash, and like at 5 or 6 years old, I had no idea what that meant. I just remember visiting the man in the dark room who had glasses and a plaid t-shirt and knew how to speak English. So on the day that we left, I asked my mom if he would be coming with us, because I had been so familiar with this guy, like leading us through this process. So I was like, "Oh, Mom, is he coming with us too?" And my mom was like, "No, he's not coming with us." Obviously, like it took a lot of like financial, took a lot of money to get here, right? So a lot of that came from my grandparents and also my uncle, so they helped us out with a lot of it. But my dad also like saved up a lot of money from when the paperwork started, because he knew that, you know, he was gonna have to get all of us over here. So even now, obviously like in our family, culturally, we don't speak about like paying the debt. We don't speak about like, oh, I'm gonna like give you how much of your money by then, you know. It's just expected. It's just like a thing that's like gonna be expected for all of us, that if you make something, you're gonna have to pay them, as in like my uncle and my grandparents, in some form of like payment, whether that's hard cash or just anything else.
And I don't remember it exactly, but it starts out something like, once there were 2 women who never knew each other. One you do not remember, and the other you call mother. So my mom is from a long line of Irish Americans, and she's really proud of that fact. But when she was 50 years old, 51, she decided to adopt me. I was 10 months old, and I was in an orphanage right outside Nanjing in Jiangsu province in China. And I'm an only child, and my mom's a single mom. So the story I was always told about why I was adopted was the Chinese side and my mom's side of it, all told to me by my mom. So for my mom, she wanted a family. She grew up, she was my age in the 60s when you were supposed to get married and have a family. She kind of put her career first. She was a teacher and then a guidance counselor. So while she was pretty educated, we were middle class because she came from a very working class background, not much money at all, and went to college. So she has a graduate degree in counseling and education, but public teachers don't get paid that much. But she really wanted kids, and she never got married. And unfortunately, she had some medical complications, so she couldn't have her own biological children. So she wanted to adopt, and after years of trying domestically and abroad, she decided to actually put herself in what she considered one of the hardest programs. So Pearl Buck Foundation is really extensive in their background checks and the requirements. Before China increased its own standards for who can adopt children, Pearl Buck had higher standards than the minimum. So my mom decided that if they thought she could raise a child, then she would be fit to raise a child. So she went through that, and it took about 13 months. So I wasn't actually born when she was going through the investigations and the training and the classes that you have to go through. And she jokes that it's harder to adopt a child than to have a child because it takes even longer. So I was adopted with who my mom calls my China sisters. So that's Tashi and Anna Marie. Anna Marie and I were next to each other in the orphanage. Our cribs were next to each other. My memories are all of America. I don't speak Chinese, although I took about 1 year of it when I was a senior in high school. So I can recognize maybe 5 characters, and I can't do tones at all, so I can't say my name. I know what it looks like. Because my mom decided to rename me Meredith Noel, and then she kept part of the original Chinese name from the orphanage, Xian, I can't say it right. That's one of my middle names, Clark. I didn't really necessarily think of myself as Chinese until I was older. Like when I was little, since preschool I can remember like the occasional racist comments, which is really when it was the most salient, and mostly comments about my eyes or ching chong, whatever. My mom has grown a lot as a person, but she started out with her generation she thought colorblindness was the best way to not be racist, which is a drastic shift from considering when she was a child, legal segregation was allowed. Like she was born and World War II was still technically going on and the Chinese Exclusion Act was still in effect. So to her, colorblind was the best way to go. She did try, but I think it's hard. If your child is your first Chinese friend, you just don't know that much about Chinese culture. So she tried to celebrate Chinese New Year by like getting Chinese food, or we would do presentations about adoption and things every year in my school through middle school, which was really cool, but it was very much her trying to figure out along with me, which I think is admirable, but I also wish she had done a little bit more before as well. I felt less Chinese, and I still do to some extent, than I feel Asian American as a group, because I experience it more as a system of privilege and disprivilege, since it's not familial ties, it's not cultural, language, food ties at all for me. It's more things like being called a chink, or like the Ching Chang Charlie chant that kids, I think, still do. Or, like things like that.
What is that chant? I don't think
it was like,
have to say it.
It was like Ching Chang Charlie, I can do karate, Chinese, Japanese, something, I don't remember, but it involved like doing this with like the different ethnicities. It was really popular in my elementary school, and I don't know why. And I didn't even know what it meant until my mom and my cousin were like, that's really racist, like you shouldn't do that, and I had no conception of it. I remember for a really long time I thought I got my darker hair and I'm really pale, but my slightly darker skin than Irish, because my aunt was Italian and she had dark hair and tanner skin, and I just thought, oh, I got it from Aunt Anna. No conception that we're not related. Like she married into our family too, like but that's how I made sense of it. So when I was 4, I could say, I'm adopted, I'm Chinese American with a little bit of Irish, that's what I'd always say, but I didn't really understand that until much later. People call Meredith Clark as a name, and they look surprised a lot when I'm the one who answers. Or in college, my first year summer, after my first year at Wellesley, I was at an 80-year-old's birthday party, family friend, and an elderly man came up to me and started talking to me and my mom, and my mom's like, oh, I'm, friends with this person, this is my daughter Meredith, and he asked how long I would be here. He told me to enjoy my stay in America, and I live here, I'm a citizen, this is my mom, I'm from New Jersey, and he's like, oh, I went to China once in the war in Vietnam, it was really interesting. I was like, I don't know if this is relevant. So things like that, where it becomes really apparent. My adoption was always painted to me in kind of a saving from the orphanage type way, and also proof that China was really sexist, because it is true, most of the people, at least in our generation, not necessarily now, things have shifted in the past 20, 30 years, and there are fewer children to adopt from China. The one-child policy is less restrictive, but I'm part of the height of that, and it was overwhelmingly female babies who were able-bodied. The only really male Chinese adoptees I know had very visible birth defects. Not that that should be a reason to ever abandon your children, but it was very true. Like, healthy girls were put up for adoption, whereas healthy boys were kept, which has definitely impacted, I guess, my thoughts about gender as well. So I'm not really very feminine at all, but I feel it's really important that I always remember that I was a daughter of China, because it's such a distinct distinction. When you're talking about adoptees from China, being male or female is a really big marker of often why and your physical ability and things like that. We just had a dumpling making party one time, and that's actually something that I've done at least once or twice a year with different people since then, so the past 3 years. And it's really fun because everyone likes to kind of learn, especially if you don't make the wrappers. Like if you just buy the pre-made dumpling wrappers and you can just show people, like, this is how much filling goes in it, like wet the outside, fold it. But in some ways, being able to teach other people how to make like Chinese dumplings, like I know how it's supposed to be said, but I can't say it, so I'm always embarrassed about using Chinese. But just knowing what this one food is supposed to be like and like how to make it and being able to, enough that I can help teach others is something that I'm really proud of, actually. So in some ways, I think like food's really important to learning about culture, and so I'm just glad I have that one piece of it almost. But even when I'm criticizing the adoption like the industry and like human trafficking and criticizing racial politics and even criticizing my mom for things she's done, I never stopped like thinking of her as my mom. I get really happy on Chinese New Year and St. Patrick's Day. And like it's a weird kind of happy because they both feel so familiar, but I realize that I see like I'm a little bit wrong for both of them, but they're both really important to me.
My mom was born in the Guangdong County, and my dad was born in Beijing, but my entire family on both sides were all Cantonese. But my father's family moved around a lot when he was younger, so actually my older aunts don't speak Cantonese at all because they spent all of their childhood in Beijing, and my dad didn't move back until he was about 5 or 8. They both come from pretty large families. My mom is one of 8, and my dad is one of 6, so I have a lot of cousins, especially every time I go back to China to visit. I don't remember anyone's name. I remember maybe like 2 people's names and the people who live in the US, which is mostly my dad's family. They don't tell me much about their childhood, but what I do know is that when my parents had graduated high school, the Cultural Revolution had started in China, so that was a large portion of their lives that got kind of cut off. They couldn't go to college until after the Cultural Revolution. And for my mother, her entire family got sent down into the villages, and she was separated from her father for a really long time. And since then, my grandfather had had a lot of health problems. My dad was a little luckier. My grandpa on my dad's side was an economics professor, and so they actually kept him on because he served as some sort of role in the government, providing advice to people. So after the Cultural Revolution, my parents both went to college in Guangdong. They went to Sun Yat-sen University. And that's actually where they met. I don't know how they met. I've asked them so many times to tell me, but they're just like, you know, we met, we had mutual friends, we were both in the economics department, and that's all I know about how they met. So they met, they graduated college, they got married, they had my brother, and around, I think, mid-1988, my father actually came to America on a Fulbright scholarship, and my mom followed him a year later on a similar scholarship as well. So when they first moved to America, if you'll notice the date when my mother moved here was 1989, and she moved here in May, and about a week after she moved here was June 4th, 1989, which is the Tiananmen Massacre, and that really shook up Chinese-US relationships. So my parents both had their scholarships pulled, and they were kind of left without any source of income in the United States, and that's how their story in the US began. For the first 6 months, my mom took on a lot of odd jobs because my dad actually continued to stay in school and continued his studies, so the family depended on my mother to earn money. And so she worked in a restaurant, she worked as a nanny, she worked as a babysitter. She did all those types of odd jobs, and for that time period, they lived in a 1-bedroom apartment with 2 other families. And luckily enough, the 2 other families were families that they knew, but I know that that's not the experience that a lot of immigrant families have. Fortunately for my mother, her English was pretty good, so within about 10 months of her getting here, she got a job within the Department of Education, and then about 6 months after that, she actually received her teaching certification and became licensed to teach within New York City public high schools. I always hear a lot of stories from my brother, actually, about how difficult life was when he first got here because he was, I think, 4 or 5 years old, and he had never left China before in his life, and suddenly, because both his parents were either in school or working, he was often sent away to summer camps where everyone around him only spoke English. And I hear this story a lot, was how he peed his pants one day because he didn't know how to ask where the bathroom was, and so rather than kind of try to mime it out, he just chose to pee his pants. And like that was a very common experience that he had within the first few months. I always ask my parents, I think, like, did you hate your time in China because of the Cultural Revolution and like all the turmoil that was happening? And My parents have actually never said anything bad about that time. Like, of course, my mom will look back on it with a little bit of sadness because she was separated from a lot of members of her family, but they've always appreciated it. They would always tell me stories of how, like, they would have this apartment and they'd have to only take cold showers, but that was the best thing in the world because when you got out of a cold shower, you felt warm. They both felt like they had pretty good lives in China, and they didn't really come here to really escape anything. They kind of just came here because it was a better education, and it afforded a little more opportunity than they would have in China. But given the choice, I think they may have even chosen to stay because a lot of their friends now are really top-notch businessmen. They hold like high government positions, and in this case, my parents here in the US, they're just public school teachers, and they're not really at the level that their friends are at. So I was born in 1995. At that time, my parents were really stable. We had a house. We actually owned a house in Bayside, Queens, which was a really great school district, and my parents had expressed that they specifically chose to move there because they wanted me to have a good education. My parents were both public school teachers. They both worked for the ESL programs, the English Second Language programs, and they both taught social studies. And my parents were always really conscious that they wanted this child to grow up Chinese American, because when my brother first got here, the one thing they really regretted was that he lost most of his Chinese because they were so focused on giving him the English language skills that he needed to succeed so that, you know, he wouldn't pee his pants again because he didn't know where the bathroom was. So they kind of regretted that, and with me they really made sure that I retained that Chinese part of my identity. So my mother would homeschool me in Chinese. She made up this little card game with Chinese characters on them to help me remember those characters. I went to like a Chinese dance school. We went to Flushing a lot and interacted with a lot of like the grandmas and the ayis there, and we only spoke Chinese at home. I actually wasn't allowed to speak English at home as a kid. So that was their way of making sure that this child, who technically was born in America, had no ties to China, retained that part of her like Chinese identity.
So my parents were born in Changle, China, which is this like small coastal city in southeast China. And I mean, it's kind of like a big like metropolis now, but back then it was a pretty small town. So when they were younger, they were definitely pretty crazy. So my mom used to tell me that she would like be in middle school and like play hooky all the time and like and like go hang out with like the other siblings. So my mom had 4 siblings, which was pretty crazy, and my dad had 4 siblings too, and they would always like ditch school and like hang out with each other and go to the town center. And like my mom was like, yeah, I would put on like all this like pretty nail polish and like do my hair, and we would go out and just like hang out in the middle of the day. And I was like, Mom, you're always telling me to go to school and like stay in school. So I think my parents grew up pretty poor. So my mom was, my grandpa was a fisherman, and on my mom's side was a fisherman, and my grandpa on my dad's side was, I think, a farmer. So they both like, even though they didn't have a lot, they were still like pretty content with it. And they were also surrounded by a lot of family members and a lot of friends. So I think they grew up pretty happily. So my mom and my dad had my brother when they were both 20 in China. So then he left a few months after that to come to the US, and he was here for 4 years before my mom and my brother came to the US. And so when my brother was born, he was just a few months old, so he had never seen my dad before. So the first time that he saw my dad, like, he was literally like, who is this man? And my dad was like, I'm your father. And that's also something I just like can't comprehend. But yeah, it was a good time before he saw the rest of his family again. My dad, being like the nonchalant guy that he is like, he would never make a big deal of it. But when he told us in the car, I literally found out about this like 3 years ago. Okay, so in the 1980s, there was this snakehead who my parents called Sister Ping, and she basically would smuggle people over to the US, specifically like Chinatown, New York, or like Hong Kong, and she would basically have someone pay her like $100,000 to have them safely bring them over to the U.S. And my dad paid her $100,000, and he basically got into a cargo ship, and there were a bunch of other Chinese people trying to make it to the U.S., and they would go below deck, so under all of the cargo, and they went to Belize, which is south of Mexico, and they all got off of the ship in Belize, and they like chilled there for a few days and recuperated, and then they got into a van and drove like up through Mexico and up to the border, and then like the smugglers were basically like, yeah, you need to like run across the border. And my dad was like, wait, what? And they were like, yeah, you just need to run across the border and you'll be in the US. And so my dad and like these Mexican immigrants and like these other Chinese immigrants literally like ran across the border. He was in Texas and he was arrested by Border Patrol, and they flew him to New York, where he would stand trial and also petition for his citizenship. He was in prison for like a while. He told me he was in prison for like a year, I think, awaiting trial and stuff like that. So it might have been that he was immediately given citizenship afterwards. Going back to like Sister Ping, who like helped a lot of like him as well as like other family members get to the U.S. Like her operations were like pretty shambly, and my dad told me that like a lot of times like they would, not just like fathers but like wives, like women, like their children would like go into these like cargo ships, and they would have like very little food and very little water and be out in the sea for a really long time. And he told me that a few years after he got to the US, like he heard this story where she was trying to smuggle this ship into the coast of New York, and what happened was that it like didn't make it because of like the coast guards were like, wait, what is this random ship doing trying to enter into the coast? And basically the smugglers like told everyone to like start swimming for shore, but a lot of them like didn't know how to swim because they were children and women and men who like had never learned how to swim, and so like they like drowned because they just like couldn't make it to shore. And like hearing that story just like, it makes me think about how dangerous it was and like what my dad was signing up for, and like he still went through with it, so it's super crazy. I mean, like I've always known my dad as someone who is very, very hardworking. Like as long as I've known him, he's worked like 6 days a week at a restaurant or like at his restaurant, except for like some time off here and there. And like he's always been committed to like working like 12-hour weeks, like 6 days a week. And he's never really complained about it, and he's never said like, oh, I don't want to do this anymore, or oh, this is really hard. And I think hearing about how he got to the US like further solidified like me thinking like, wow, my dad is just like so amazing. So he came in 1988, my mom came in 1992. So as soon as he got out, my grandpa was in the US already, so my grandpa sort of like helped him find his footing in Chinatown. And I think because it was Chinatown and there was a large like Chinese immigrant population there, he felt more comfortable than I would say like going to any other place maybe to settle down. And he started looking for work as like a busboy. I think he was like a busboy at like a diner for like a few years, and then he started like learning English and learning about the restaurant trade and trying to start his own business, and like especially preparing for my brother and my mom to immigrate to the US as well. I think I got a general sense that it felt weird for them to like finally be reunited, and obviously my mom and my brother were getting acclimated to being in the US and being in this like completely new place. And my mom, dad, and brother all lived in this like apartment, in one room in an apartment in Chinatown, along with my aunt and her side of the family. And so it was definitely a weird situation for my mom and my brother. And my mom immediately took up like a job at a, what are they called? A sewing factory? No. She immediately took up a job at a sewing factory where she would basically put clothes together every day, and so she would work like really, really long hours. And for my mom, I think that was a completely different life, because beforehand she was just being a teenager, you know, like she was just hanging out with her friends, and like my dad would send money home, like whatever money he had, and like she would be living at home and taking care of my brother and not working at all. So to move to the US and then start working immediately, and to be working like 13 hours a day, and to also have to take care of my brother, it was definitely a change for her. Around late 1990s, my mom and my dad opened their first restaurant in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, and at that time it was like not like the hipster like kale salad avocado bar place that it is now. Like it was a pretty dangerous like place to be, because there were a lot of crimes going on, and because of that the rental rate for like commercial places were really cheap, so they rented out that place and they opened up their first takeout restaurant. And I have distinct memories of visiting there and hating it, because the customers were kind of sketchy, and they had like bulletproof glass over like the cashier's thing. My dad would tell me about all the times when he would go out and deliver food and be like harassed by people, or like people wouldn't pay him, or like he would feel unsafe, especially because he was delivering food on like a bicycle and it wasn't like a car. So that was also really scary for him. And I remember one time I was kind of too young to really like process everything, but my brother told me about how they had like a robbery, and someone came in with like a gun and basically pointed it at my mom and was like, give us money, and my mom like handed over all this money. And I don't really remember too much about it, but I think it was a really traumatic incident for my mom and my dad and my brother, who was old enough to understand like what was happening. And yeah, they had that restaurant for I think like 10 years or so, and then they sold it, and they took the summer off, and then they bought another restaurant, this time in New Jersey. And this one was a bit more like, it was bigger, it was like more of a like an eat-in place versus like a takeout place. And yeah, they've been doing that for about like 15 years now, and yeah, they're like thinking about retiring soon. I went to high school in Jersey, and my mom would force me to help out on the weekends and on like weeknights and stuff like that. And it was actually like I have a lot of fond and like warm memories from that, because even though I didn't really want to be there and I wanted to be like hanging out with my friends or like going to the movies like other people were, I got to spend a lot of time with my mom and my dad, and I got to hang out with a lot of the other like chefs and the people working as like waitresses, and they all had really interesting stories, and they all treated me like so nicely. A lot of them were undocumented immigrants, and so like they would be people who were like 20, 21, 22 who had just immigrated here and were trying to pay off their debts and were trying to get their citizenships. And I think comparing myself like going to high school and like applying to college next to them who were working so hard to get their citizenship and like had this amount of debt to pay off, and it really like humbled me to be able to spend my like evenings and my nights with them, and at the same time to realize that we had so many similarities. Like we liked watching the same things, and we liked like having the same hobbies, and so it really humbled me, and it made me realize like how lucky I was.
Wow. Yeah. Don't put that in there. Please. No, don't put that in there. No. My grandma, when she was really young, she immigrated to Korea. A lot of people from Shandong actually moved to Korea during that time, because Shandong is very, very close to Korea. So they were boat people. They, during that time, there were no regulations on immigration or anything. They literally just jumped on the boat and went to Korea and hoped for the best. However, when she grew up, they were trying to escape the Korean War, went back to China. And then in China, what happened was the communists took over. So to avoid that, they moved back to Korea, and then they moved to Taiwan again. That was where my mom was born. And they still had a lot of family back in Korea. Like my mom's aunts, all the aunts and uncles were there. So at the age of 4, she immigrated from Taiwan to Korea, and then she lived there for basically all her life. Actually not all her life, sorry. Until she was 18 as well, and then she went to Taiwan for school. So my mom, whenever I asked her about her childhood and also how she grew up, she always told me how she never felt like at home because her whole family history was based on immigration within Asia, essentially to escape, war. So my grandma was a refugee all her life, and so my mom never really felt at home. Even in Korea, they lived in a Chinese community, almost like a Chinatown. But whenever she would go to school or go on the streets, like the Korean kids would make remarks like, she would say the Korean kids would always call me like slave to the motherland. So motherland is China, right? So yeah, it's a derogatory term. The reason why she decided to immigrate to the U.S. is that as a child in Korea, there were, a lot of like Christian missionaries and like churches that like everyone would go to, because the U.S. churches and U.S. missionaries were the places that provided flour, that provided milk, that provided candy. So I think from young, that mindset of U.S. and U.S. as success and opportunities was like ingrained in their heads, really ingrained with their background. And after she graduated college, my grandma also was very, very adamant on all her children immigrating to the U.S. because she's experienced so much war, so much suffering. She's been a refugee all her life. And what she would always say to my mom is, go to the U.S. U.S. has no war. U.S. has no suffering. U.S. has all the riches and all the success that you can find. That's where you need to end up, and that's where you need to go. And she came on a student visa, so she studied at the University of Portland for about a year. And something that really surprised me was immediately when she stepped foot, in America, she had to work so hard. My mom is, that term, 女强人, so she's just so strong, and I never knew this actually, but when she was studying in the US, she worked 3 jobs for many years. So in the morning she would wake up at 7 a.m., babysit until noon, and then to save on bus fare, she would walk from her home to the babysitting area, which is a couple miles away. Bus fare was 25 cents, so she would walk a couple miles to save 25 cents. So she would babysit until noon, and then she would work the lunch shift until nighttime at one restaurant, and then she would work the night shift at another restaurant until 2 a.m. So she had 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 1, 2, 14-hour day? She would have a 14-hour day, and that's something I can't imagine doing ever. So she drove by herself in a used car with all her belongings to San Francisco and started her own business in a van. And she drove to pretty much every single state, and at every county fair, at every state fair, she would set up a booth to sell all these exotic merchandise, which is literally just Chinese fans or something like that, or jewelry or knickknacks. And she told me every single day all she ate was Denny's, and every day she lived at a Motel 6. After going to all those state fairs, she continued working at the restaurant. And then this guy in jewelry was like, hey, I want you to work for me. And after she learned all those skills, she established her own company. So my dad was born in Penang, Malaysia. Yeah, and then he lived there for pretty much all his younger life. And when he turned about 18, like college age, he moved to the UK for school. That's where he studied at UCL, and then he got his PhD. He worked extremely hard. Like, he used to tell me how, like, because he, was Asian in a foreign country like the UK, he had to work extra hard because everyone is looking at you. Do you guys know the company called Pfizer? So it's a pharmaceutical company, Pfizer. He was the first Asian employee ever to be at Pfizer, which is crazy to think about. Like, I don't know, it's just crazy to think about. So he worked in a branch of Pfizer in a little town called Sandwich in England. And in that town, there were no Asians. He was the only Asian in that town, other than like a Chinese takeout restaurant. So he faced a lot of discrimination during that time. He told me how he essentially made his department, like he called it the UN, because that's when he became the head of the department, that's when he started hiring like minorities. So he hired like people of Southeast Asian descent, other Malaysian Chinese people, like people from Ireland and like Scotland. So like just a huge like conglomeration of like people of different ethnicities and backgrounds, and he called it the UN, and he was like pretty proud of himself. Yeah, and he told me about how like when he was in the UK, when he was at the grocery store, they wouldn't serve him. So like when he went up to the cash register to like pay, they would ignore him and take on the next customer behind him. There was another time where he brought 4 of his colleagues at Pfizer who were also, one was like Singaporean, a couple of others were also Malaysian. They went to a bar, and when they opened the doors, the entire bar went silent because like 5 Asian people just walked into a bar and they just had to stop drinking their beer. It was a pub, and like they just literally stopped everything that they were doing. And like the way my dad described it was like it went silent, and the only thing you could hear was like the music that was playing in the background, and everything was silent because like 5 Asian people just walked into the bar. And yeah, so he was like that was pretty interesting. He always like told me about how he had to work extra hard to somehow prove that he could do the same work as the other employees, the other white employees, even though he knew that he was capable of, doing even better work. But there was always that kind of like people looking down on you because of your race, because of your ethnicity, that kind of thing. So in the end, after working there for quite a while, he decided to take, like new technology back to Malaysia. And so he started working in Malaysia again. And then his company linked up with like another company in the US, and that's how he came to the US. So a completely different like mindset and different story and journey than my mom. It's really interesting at home because on the dinner table, it'd be Malaysian dishes like curry, like laksa, mee goreng, like those type of char kway teow, like all those type of dishes. And then there'll be like always my mom can't ever have a meal without kimchi or like different types of like banchan, which like side dishes. Yeah, and so we always we always must have kimchi and seaweed to eat with our dishes, and then obviously we'll have our Chinese dishes as well. So it's like a really weird kind of dynamic. And like when we have like family gatherings on my mom's side, like in one sentence it'll be Sanlonghua, Mandarin, English, and Korean all together in one sentence. So it's like, what just happened? I mean, I've always been a little confused, like especially with my mom's side. Like mom's side takes a lot of pride in being Chinese because of the discrimination that they've experienced in Korea and also, in Taiwan. So they really hold on to those Chinese values. At the same time, like the dishes that they eat and like the phrases that they use, it's also very much Korean because they've lived there for so long and that land has been their home. And then, so there are like a lot of conflicts within like my family itself, because it's like, what do you consider yourself as? Like Korean Chinese, Korean American, Chinese American? Like by blood we're Chinese, but it's like all these different cultures. You experience just so many cultures and like you become like acculturated to like one, but then at one point like you don't feel like you belong there, so it's like, who are you?
When I was little, my grandparents lived in an apartment complex in the Lower East Side, like kind of a little bit outside of Chinatown, and every Halloween a lot of kids would come like trick-or-treat, and so like our neighbors would be giving out like Hershey's bars and like Kit Kats and like really fun stuff, and my grandparents would give out like pears and apples and like a lot of fruit. And I remember like feeling embarrassed by it and thinking like, why can't you guys just give out like regular candy? Because all my friends would come to the door because we all like lived around that area. But thinking back on it now, I actually think that my grandparents like didn't know this tradition of like giving candy on Halloween, and I don't think Halloween is something that's celebrated or like even a holiday in China. So them like going out of their way to give away fruit and to like open the door and like spend time with like these kids who came to the door, I think was them trying to like integrate themselves into the culture. And at that time I was kind of embarrassed by it, but now I think it's really cute actually, and I love it.
My parents don't celebrate Christmas really. Like in China, like they didn't celebrate Christmas. They're not Christian. And when they first came to the US, they didn't celebrate Christmas either. But when I was a kid, I really, really wanted to celebrate Christmas because, TV shows made it seem so nice. I just really wanted to experience it. So while we were living in Brooklyn, they bought our family's first Christmas tree for me, and they also bought like a box of these like styrofoam ornaments, just like covered in red thread. So they're really cheap ornaments and like a really cheap plastic tree. And they set it up in our apartment, and then we had like Christmas. It was a lot of fun for me as a kid. And actually that tree has been the same tree we've been using until just this past Christmas, and we still have the same ornaments as well. So like that tree has really like stayed through the years. Like every Christmas we put up that same tree. It's pretty short actually. Back then it was like a 5-foot tree of plastic. So like I'm taller than the tree now. And the ornaments are like pretty much falling apart, but they're still in the box, and like we still use those ornaments and we still use the tree, which was really nice.
I think it was 3rd grade or 4th grade, but I don't know if this happened when you guys were in elementary school, but like when I was in elementary school at this school, whenever it was your birthday, like your parents would like bring in cake, and they would make like these little goodie bags, which were just like candy in like a plastic bag for like every kid in the class. And when it was my birthday, I kind of thought that, oh, like my parents aren't gonna do that for me because like they're always busy working and like they're not gonna like go out of their way to like buy a cake and like make goodie bags. But so the night before my birthday, I saw my mom like come in with like these bags of like candy and like these Barbie like plastic goodie bags, and she stayed up like the entire night just like filling them with candy, and I was helping her too. And I just like remember feeling really, really thankful for her and like feeling really touched because I just didn't think that like she would make the time, and I know that she was working like 12 hours days, and I didn't expect her at all to go out of her way to do that for me, but she did. And then she came in the next day with cake for me, and we all celebrated my birthday, so yeah.
When I decided to be a CAMS major, like, I had to calm myself down for like up to like 15, 20 minutes, and then I gave a call to my mom, and I was like, Mom, I need to tell you something. She's like, oh my God, what's happening? Like, I was like, so I found out that I really like CAMS. I really like cinema and media studies. She's like, yeah, I know you like movies. And I was like, but like, that's what I want to study, and that's what I want to do. Like, when I watch movies and when I'm taking like these production classes and these film classes, like, I feel like a sense of purpose, and I feel something totally different than, you know, when I'm taking like econ or something. And like, at that moment, I just like started crying for some reason. For some strange reason, I just started crying, and she's like, why are you crying? Like, what's happening? What's wrong? And I was like, are you mad at me? Like, are you disappointed in me? I'm sorry, like, but this is how I feel. And then she's like, so what? Why are you sad? If this is how you feel, then this is how you feel. Like, don't be mad at yourself. Don't think I'm mad at you. Like, I'll love you no matter what. And if you like it, if you love doing it, then that's your calling. And then I was like, exactly, like the freedom feeling. I was just like, oh my goodness. And then the next thing she's like, do you know the director, Ang Lee? She's like, oh, look, you'll be the next Ang Lee. Like, that's what you're gonna do.
So my mom's retired, she's pretty old, and so everything we kind of live on is her retirement money, so it's the money she has, you know, to live on for forever. And I didn't get a different fellowship I had applied for in the fall, which would have been traveling a lot, and it would have actually been studying adoption, and I wanted to end it in China, because we've never been able to afford the chance to go. My cousin was adopted from Vietnam. Every summer I got to go to Vietnamese culture camp for adoptees, and last summer he actually went to Vietnam for a few weeks and met his biological mom and dad and brother, and they're Facebook friends now. So I was not jealous in a bad way, but just, you know, wishing I could do that. But I didn't think I'd be able to until I was much older and had my own job. But my mom actually offered part of like her like life savings to me if I want to make that trip now, if I think it's really important. And I thought that was really amazing.
This one time, I got into a huge argument with my mom, and she was taking me to this extracurricular activity. I even forgot what that was. But I was being a brat, and like, I was just giving her so much attitude, and like, I didn't want to wake up for this like extracurricular activity. It was so early in the morning. I just gave her all this attitude, and the night before we were also arguing about something which I completely forgot about. And then in that morning, she went to come get me again, because I just wouldn't get up, and like, I glared at her, and then she glared back, and then like, at that, there was like this pause, and then like, she slapped me. And then, like, I don't know, like, she's never like hit me before, and like, or she's hit me, but like, after she slapped me, she started crying, and she would always say how her mom would always hit her, and she would never lay like a hand on me, but like, at that moment, I knew like how much I hurt her and how much she loved me to like elicit that action. So, yeah. And then after that, she like started crying and was like, I'll never hit you again. Like, I'll never do that ever again. Yeah.
And did she?
No, she didn't. After that, she never did. She kept her word, even when I was being a brat.
You know, like just working hard, even though their scholarships had just gotten pulled and they had no source of income, they could have easily just given up and been like, you know what, we're gonna go back to China. But they persevered. They lived in that one-bedroom apartment with 2 other families. They worked through not having the perfect English skills they worked through trying to get that teacher certification and being able to be employed just to be able to provide that kind of life for me. So I think even though it's not something they explicitly did while I was alive, that's definitely something I appreciate them a lot for.
I think that my dad just kind of thought of it as like, yes, I'm leaving my wife and my son behind, but I'm making this sacrifice so that when we are reunited with each other, it'll be much better for the whole family.
I guess I love you to both of them. It took me a lot longer to be able to say that to my birth parents than it did to my mom, but I'm actually very religious. I'm Catholic. I'm on the Multi-Faith Council here in Newman, E-Ward, so I pray pretty regularly, at least every week, a lot, like every day, and I say a prayer for my mom and also for my birth parents, and I always just hope that they're happy and healthy and safe, and that, you know, they feel whole. And I want them to think of me, but not in a bad way. And I think the same message to my mom now, because she's at home, I'm her only child, so, you know, she misses me when I'm gone. But I guess for all of my parents, it's I love you, I think about you a lot, even when you're not here, and I might get mad sometimes, but I also like to believe that we're family.
Like being the kids of like first generation immigrants means that you naturally become their, you know, public representative, or like they would ask you to, you know, translate for them or like say something in English for them, and I sort of didn't expect that responsibility because at first it fell onto my elder sisters, but now that, you know, they moved away and have their own family, it's sort of like fallen onto my lap, you know what I mean? So one of the things that I learned to, you know, when I was little, I've always thought that it was like a burden, and I was complaining about having that responsibility. You know, like like as a kid, you don't want to go to the DMV with your parents, you don't want to go to the hospital and translate for them, or, you know, you don't want to do their taxes or, you know, learn about like, I don't know, like mass health, right? So it's like one of those things that you sort of dread all the time. But at one point, my parents started apologizing and sort of asking me for help instead of demanding it, because I was older now, and English just sort of gives you more, you know, authority in the public sphere. So like, you know, when my parents started asking me, you know, if I could do this for them or if I could do that for them, you know, I don't know when that change came about, but I feel very burdened by the fact that they asked me instead of just demand it. And I wish I could just tell them that, you know, like I'm their daughter, like I could, you know, I'm supposed to do that and I want to do that, you know? And I know I still complain, I'm not perfect, like, you know, nobody wants to do all that stuff, but yeah, I've never been that touchy with my parents, like, you know, I don't know how to say it in Vietnamese without, you know, being sort of sounding very childish, because my Vietnamese isn't all that great either, but not sounding very cheesy either, because I'm very stubborn.
I guess one thing I want to tell my parents is I will always need them. So going on with what Feng said earlier, you know, coming here, being first gen, basically everything, you kind of have like an expectation. Like knowing the English language is like a tool for my parents, right? So, you know, filling out paperwork, being that person on the phone, or like just being the translator at like any appointments, meetings, it does get tiring. Like I will not deny that, and I do complain a lot, but they only need me for like my tongue. So, but I always will need my parents. You know, I will always need my mom's like home cooked meals, and my dad's 10 phone calls to make sure I get into Freeman every time he drops me off. So I will always need them.
I felt like when I was younger, I definitely never really understood how much my parents and even my brother went through. I was definitely like the luckiest one in my family. I was born in Canada. I grew up in the US. Like I never had to go through really like any time where I like felt like I didn't have enough, or like my family didn't have enough. And I know my parents and my brother definitely weren't that lucky. So like even now when I like know the stories, I still don't think I quite understand. So I don't know how much I can say, except that I'm really grateful for the life I have now. Because I don't think I would have the chance to like be at Wellesley or have like or like be so comfortable in my situation if my parents didn't have to give up so much and my brother didn't have to give up so much for me. Are you crying, Jan? Yeah, I feel like when I like fight with my parents, like any kid does, like I forget how grateful I am. And I feel like I never quite said that to them before because I don't think they ever expected thanks for that either. They did that because they wanted to. And they never expected me to like have to feel grateful for that, but I definitely I feel so grateful for my life. Okay, I'm good. I'm done. Okay. Dude, I'm an ugly crier. This is not okay. If I'm the only one who cried, I'm gonna be so pissed.
Yeah. And it's like, when I go home, like I know, like time at home is so precious because I'm in college now, and then after college, you know, I have to find work, and it's like, how much longer do I have with them? And like, I never verbally express that, and it's like really hard to think about, and like, but then at the same time, like when I go home, it's like I want to hang out with my friends, and like I want to do like so many other things, and then I see my parents at home, I'm just like, God, I'm such a bitch, like I'm such a terrible daughter, like they've been through so much more than I have, and I can't even give them an hour of my time, like, yeah, I don't know, it's complicated, like I love them so much, and it's like, I feel like I don't know how to like say it, and like when I say I love you, I don't feel like it's enough. Like when I say I love you to like my mom, like it's not enough compared to like what she's given to me, what she's done to me. When I say like I love you to my dad, I don't think I've ever said I love you to my dad. Yeah, it's never enough. There's nothing I can do to ever give back like what they've given to me. Yeah, like their experiences, like how they like suffered, how they worked, and like got to where they are now. There's no way, like I love you